Welcome in to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, the official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. A podcast dedicated to everything you need to know about the squad. Hear from players, coaches, broadcasters, and those who cover the NBA on a daily basis. It's time to flock up. The New Orleans Pelicans Podcast starts right now.
Welcome back to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast, official podcast of your New Orleans Pelicans. Gus Kattengell, Yves Eichenhofer, literally on the court here at the Smoothie King Center as the Pelicans are wrapping up their practice here on Thursday, getting ready for two more preseason games. Jim, there was going to be a preseason game today on Friday against Orlando, but obviously Hurricane Milton had an effect on that. Head coach Willie Green had this to say following practice on Wednesday about the cancellation.
Well, my first thought is not even on the game. It's really just all the folks in Florida that are going to be impacted by this hurricane. And, hopefully everybody's being safe, people get out. And that's the most important thing. It's like we got to do what's best because of the circumstances right now. So, we would like to be able to play 4 games, but this is more important. And, we'll see what happens after this, but not a big concern at all.
So, Jim, obviously the right thing to do. Now, they still go to Florida over the weekend to take on the Miami Heat. This is what Coach had to say just a few minutes ago about facing Miami on Sunday.
Yeah, it'll be a good test. We'll have a few practice days under our belt in preparation for Miami. And once again, we'll get a chance to get on the floor and really compete and work on our execution.
So, Jim, obviously the right thing to do, not worry about the game on Friday. Coach says it gives you a little more time to practice and work on things. And then, hey, Sunday against the Miami Heat. You remember those 2 games a year ago?
Yes, they were quite hotly contested. There was definitely some intensity. There was a chokehold or two. There was a couple guys coming off the bench and meeting at the scorer's table and swinging at each other. And then when the teams played the second game in Miami, it seemed like that was one of the games that the Pelicans were the most motivated to play, and they had kind of a score to settle, and I think they were very satisfied to get that victory and get some payback against the Heat. Kind of some emotion you don't necessarily see that much during the regular season. You play 82 games, and it's a long year, but that was pretty sweet to be able to beat the Heat after what happened in the game in the Smoothie King Center.
Yeah, Coach said, look, there's a balance. You'd love to play a game. You do get some extra time to work on things, and he said he was very specific with what they practiced on Thursday and being able to get in on Friday. Overall, look, this is a veteran team, not a young team, so it's not like you are having to install and put in new things this year, Jim. That's a little bit different. You can kind of just get to work on refining things, and I kind of feel like that's not a bad thing for this team right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think Willie Green definitely said that they would have liked to played another game against another NBA team. Obviously, now they're going to go almost a week between preseason games. They played Monday against Orlando. They're not going to play again until Sunday against the Heat. But I guess the positive is that they are getting a couple more practices, and not just practices, but on their home floor. We wanted to see them play better and win more games in the blender last season. So maybe this will help as far as just getting more acclimated and adjusted to their home arena and their home court.
All right. Well, tell you what, we're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming game on Sunday against the Heat, but it's time to welcome in our very special guest, Will Guillory of The Athletic, to get his sense as to what this team could maybe be this season with some of its special players and personnel. All right, time now to welcome in our very special guest, and Mr. Jim Eichenhofer. It's always special when a Brother Martin Crusader joins us, Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic. Sir, you cover the NBA, cover the Pels, the Heat, all that. How are you, man? Good to see you again for another season.
I'm doing well, man, and this feels extra special because we're doing it in person for once. Yes. I'm usually talking to y'all over the phone.
I have access now, Will. I have access.
Yeah, I can almost reach out and touch Jimmy now. This feels great.
I like that. Behind you, I have a wall. I started this year. It's kind of a dry eraser board, and you can look behind you, and that's all the signatures of players that came in for Media Day. As you can see, everyone's above 6'4", 6'6", so it's pretty high on the board. So there's a little room on the bottom. Jim, would you like to start a new tradition, maybe if we have a guest on the Pelicans podcast in studio? Will Guillory, would you like to be the first non-Pelican player to write your name on that at some point this season?
This is special right here. Should I do it right now?
If you would like, yeah, just do it. Just kind of like where the red towel is over there. Go ahead.
Where's the?
It's over here to your left. Here it is. This is. I almost feel like this is live radio.
And by the way,
yep.
we also have to say it's of course it's horrible what's happening in Florida, but we weren't expecting Will to be able to be here in person today because he was supposed to be in Florida, but I guess the silver
He's very
lining
disappointed, by the way.
Silver lining of that is we get to see him in
If you and
person.
Eric Spoelstra were like to go have dinner somewhere, Will Guillory, where would Will Guillory and Eric Spoelstra go have dinner in Miami? Is it Miami Beach? Are we going Coral Gables? Are we going somewhere, different? Like where are we going to have dinner if Coach Spoelstra says, man, it's been a while. Like to see you. Let's go out and have dinner. Where would you go have dinner in Miami?
I think it's hard to go wrong with Prime 112, man. Especially if I'm not the guy paying. The Prime 112 is always a good time.
There it is.
So yeah,
all right. I got that, man.
Sure.
Well, go ahead, Jim. Let's go. I can smell the dry eraser markers. There you go. That is the first time.
I couldn't quite reach where Yves Missi signed his name.
He's him and Daniel Tice were
Yeah.
at the very top. So there you go.
Yeah, well, I guess we could start off by talking about, I think, the number one topic nationally about the Pelicans right now, which is Zion Williamson. I mean, what do you think about, you got to see some of training camp, you got to watch him play in the first preseason game, where he is right now, maybe compared to the way he started some of these previous seasons physically?
Yeah, I think you kind of said it with the last word there. Physically, he definitely looks like a different guy. He looks like he's extremely locked in, extremely focused. I was lucky enough during the offseason to be able to spend some time with him out there in Texas. Got to see a few workouts with him and kind of hear where his mind was at. And I think it's really you kind of see how much his just mentality, maturity level, commitment, it's all at a different level. And I think, we talked about this a lot last year, that for a lot of guys, it requires, going through some failures, going through some times where you got to look in the mirror and things aren't going your way. And I think, during the early parts of Zion's career, there were injuries, there was turmoil within the coaching staff, there was upheaval on the roster. So there was a lot of reasons for him to not necessarily own some of the shortcomings early in his career. But I think in particular that in-season tournament loss last year in Vegas, where they got embarrassed, lost by 40, LeBron's out there stunting on him. I think that was I think whenever Zion's career is over, I think we're going to look back at that as a watershed moment in his career, where it all kind of crashed down on him, and it was kind of a destroy and rebuild type of thing, where he kind of had to remove his ego and kind of say, I've got to fix something within myself. I got to approach things differently. And I think ever since then, when you talk to people around the Pelicans, his work ethic has been different. The way he communicates with his teammates is different. The way he's watching film is different. And I think you saw him progressing towards that, leading up to him scoring 40 in that play-in game against the Lakers. And unfortunately, of course, he got hurt. But I think he kind of built on that during the offseason. And I think he's going to be a different guy this year, man. I think he's going to be outstanding this season. I'm excited to see what he looks like.
You mentioned your visit with him in Texas. Can you kind of share with us some of what that was like? It seemed like it was kind of a back to the basics, kind of no frills, kind of getting ready for basketball season type deal.
As you guys know, as an NBA writer, we used to working late at night. So, waking up for 6 a.m. workouts to watch Zion wasn't exactly the greatest part of my summer. I'm not used to setting my alarm that early in the morning. So that was definitely different. But it was the first time I ever got to experience anything like that, actually seeing an NBA guy in his element, working out in a gym, basically by himself, getting to be around, some of the people close to him, getting to be around, a few Pels staff members. And I think ultimately one of the things I wrote about at the time, I think that was very interesting in itself, that he made a commitment to having Pelicans people around him throughout the offseason. I think a lot of times early in his career, he would kind of go away in the offseason and they wouldn't hear from him until it was time to come back, right? And I think he made a commitment to being in constant communication with the team, having people around him in Texas, having assistant coaches out there with him in Texas. So I think that's something that he really wanted to make a commitment to the team, kind of showing that his approach was different. And I think also just seeing how he worked and just seeing how committed he was to doing the work, doing two-a-days. He had a professional chef out there living with him, fixing all of his meals. So I think you saw just where his mentality was different. And I just thought the work he was doing was really impressive. And I think you see just him having a different level of commitment right now. And I think, we've been fortunate enough with this group of guys. We've seen them all kind of as babies, and we've seen them grow up over time. And I think you really saw how much more mature Zion is now compared to where he was in 2019.
By the way, I mean, usually when I see 5 or 6 a.m., it's because I'm coming in from the night before. Still at that point.
It is a little behind the curtain there. Will, along those lines of what you're saying, too, it's something that kind of stood out to me. And I was out there the early part of training camp with Jim and Todd. And it's interesting. I made the observation. I told him, like, if you didn't know, if you just had walked in, and you're looking at practice, like, what's his problem? Why is he? What is he doing? He's constantly talking to himself, like he's sitting down after, in the middle or towards the end of a drill, and they're subbing players in and out, but he sits down on the bench, and I mean his hands are going, he's pointing on the court. Daniel Tice is trying to talk to him, and he walked away. Corey Brewer starts. I'm like, who? Why? Who's he have a problem with? What's going on? and Graf is like, no, man, he's locked in. It's like he's upset about a player that didn't get the ball this way or didn't score or something. I'm like, I've never seen that other, obviously, than what I think we all saw towards the end of last season. Mm-hmm. And that was the thing that stood out to me. My final day at practice there on Thursday, that was the first day in that camp for me that I saw that, as Graf likes to call it, that tiger stroll. Not Tiger Woods, but like the real animal. He's stalking, right? It's like, it's that walk that he sort of has, that gait where the play ends and, he was talking smack to somebody that was guarding him. I think it was Greg Monroe, and it was a play that ended, and I don't remember if it was a block or a miss. It didn't go in. And he immediately starts pointing to the top of the key where Dejounte is like, give him the ball. He wanted to run the play again. Got it. They did a pick and roll. He dunked on him. And then he's still talking smack. And that's what I'm saying. That's different, right? I mean, that's different because we can see that and understand that in a game. The flow of a game, you're on camera, you're playing. But to see that at practice, because that translates, doesn't it?
Yeah, no doubt. And I think it's kind of what I talked about before, where Zion came into the league with everybody telling him how great he was. He was going to be the next this. He was going to be the next that. And I think over time, people have kind of forgotten who he is and how capable he is of being the top level superstar. And I think for the first time, he's coming into this season really feeling like he's got something to prove, really feeling like, nah, y'all really forgot who I am. I got to show y'all what type of player I am. And, of course, a lot of that is things that he's done, the injuries, a lot of that you can't really blame a lot of people for kind of turning their attention to guys like Wemby or Ja Morant or some of these other guys. But I mean, we've all seen it. When that dude is locked in and playing at the level he can really play at, there aren't many people in this league who can mess with him at all. He's that level of superstar. And I think what you also saw at the end of last season was it wasn't just him scoring, because that's what we've seen all the time is him being able to score at a high level. Once he really locks in defensively the way he has recently, and we've seen a little bit of that during the preseason, we saw it at the end of last season, that's where he takes this thing to a whole different level, and he turns into that all-NBA MVP level guy where he's not only scoring 25, 28 a night, but he's getting you steals. He's getting blocks from the weak side. That's when it's like, okay, this guy is just dominating the game in every way possible. Because
that's what I was going to ask. It's something we get asked and talk about all the time. What is the reasonable expectation? What is the ceiling? What do we expect? And Will, here we are, year 6, and we're still at that point, though. We want to see them in the postseason, right? I mean, seeing him in the postseason, he wants to be in that postseason. I think we all agree. We got that last little tantalizing taste. I know he last played on Monday in the preseason game, but the last real game was that 40-point performance against the Lakers, a team that before that took it to the Pels. Same team, but that was a different Z that night. And I think that's that thing that gets so many Pels fans just salivating. If that guy gets in the postseason, he is that type of player that can take a team into another round or further.
Yeah, there's no doubt. And we've seen consistently throughout his career, other than that Vegas game, when he gets on the big stage, he steps it up. He does what stars are supposed to do. He rises to the occasion. He lifts, the guys around him. And I think you're exactly right. I think that hunger to finally feel what the postseason feels like. And I think what hurts him even more is that they made it twice while he's been here, and he's had to watch from the side, right? And I think in particular last year, you really felt how much he was like, man, if I could have played, this thing would look so different, right? It felt like the Pels were just not a complete team when they played against the Thunder. And, of course, the Thunder are a great team. They probably would have won that series regardless because of everything they had. But every game you watch, it's like, man, this thing would look so different if Zion was out there. If Lou Dort had to guard Zion instead of Brandon Ingram.
Makes a difference.
It would have made such a huge difference. And we all saw it. So you can only imagine how he felt watching from the sidelines, knowing, like you said, the last time he was on the court, he was dropping 40 on LeBron and Anthony Davis. So I think he felt all of that throughout the offseason, that disappointment, that anger, all of those emotions, he kind of bottled it all up and put it into his work, put it into, making sure he changed the way he approached things, how he moved on a day-to-day basis. But again, we can say all of this and all of it sounds good, but he's got to deliver throughout the season, and he's got to actually be on that playoff stage. He's got to be there when they need him most. I think that's one of the frustrating things for the Pelicans. Like you said, we've seen him reach those heights and play so great, but he hasn't been able to sustain it long enough, and especially sustain it into the postseason. So I think that's ultimately how he's going to be judged. He knows that you can do whatever you want in a regular season, but if you don't perform in that playoff stage, nobody cares. So that's what he has to do this season, and I think that's a pressure everybody within this organization feels this season.
Listening to Zion over the last 10 days since training camp began, you can tell how much he's looking forward to playing with Dejounte Murray.
Yeah.
What impact do you think Dejounte is going to make on Zion and just the team overall? I mean, is it the kind of thing where maybe we should be making even a bigger deal of his arrival in terms of what it's going to mean for the Pelicans overall?
Oh, I think you're exactly right. I think, for one, you've heard Z kind of joke about it, how, throughout his time, especially, since Lonzo Ball and Eric Bledsoe, that team kind of got broken up, where so much of the offense night to night was running through B.I. and Zion. And we always talked about Point Zion and Brandon Ingram, whether he was a pseudo point guard. And those guys were certainly capable of doing it. I mean, this team won 49 games last year with those guys running the offense night to night. But I think it takes a toll over time on those guys, where they've got to create shots for themselves and everybody else. And I think when those guys were in the gym with Dejounte Murray for the first time in Nashville, it was like, man, I can just get easy baskets. I can just run the wing and just get an open shot. I don't have to play 1-on-5 to get mine. Mm-hmm. I don't have to, go through 3 or 4 guys in the paint to get to what I need. And I think that's what those guys are really excited about, the potential of just being able to get those easy buckets, not have to work for every single basket. And I think with Dejounte, I think on the other side, he's excited about, I just get to come out and just feed these guys. I don't have to get 25 for us to compete. I don't have to feel the need to carry everything when Trae Young's out of the game. I could just come out and just make the game easier for them, and that's going to make me look good. So I think it's a reciprocal relationship, and I think also those guys have talked a lot about having Dejounte and Herb Jones on defense and the way those two guys create turnovers. And I think when you see this Pelicans teams at their best, it's when they're playing in transition. It's when Z's out there in the break. It's when Herb Jones is on the break, Trey Murphy. And I think having Dejounte here is going to create more of those opportunities for those guys to get out in transition, to get those easy baskets. And I think that's when this team is extremely dangerous, because they have so many options that they can hurt you with when they're playing in the open court.
Sometimes I think about some of the stats that people have listed about Zion's career the first few years that he's played, where it's like the only guy that's averaged 20-something points and shot 60% from the field. It is kind of frightening to think about what his efficiency could go to with a point guard that sees the floor like Dejounte and somebody that can get into the paint. So, I mean, that's definitely something that I think will be worth watching. Can he take – it's hard to ask a guy who's on high volume to say to him, like, yeah, I know you shoot 60%, but can you go up from that? Right. But I think it is possible that he'll do that. And for BI and some of the other guys as well, I think the offense has been pretty good, but I think they need to get to top 5, top 10 efficiency. So I think that's something that Dejounte could bring. In terms of the starting lineup, and obviously so far with Trey Murphy being out and BI didn't play in the first preseason game and isn't going to play into the last game, it's made things a little easier in terms of figuring out who's going to start. But what are your thoughts on what you think they're going to do, or just their ability to kind of throw so many different possible combinations of 5 guys out there?
Yeah, I gotta watch my words whenever we get to this conversation, because if I refer to Zion as a center, I think Willie Green might crash through the roof and tackle me, because the word's been put down. We are not allowed to refer to Zion Williamson as a center. He is the point guard of this team. He's the whatever you want to call Zion for this team, but you just don't call him a center. So I think there is potential where Zion's going to play without a traditional center in the starting lineup. I think that's might be the lineup we see the most, where you can call Herb Jones the center. You could call C.J. McCollum the center if you want to, but I think they're going to play small a lot. I think there are going to be certain nights where you got to throw a Daniel Tice or a Yves Missi out there to kind of bang with a Jokic or an Embiid down in the post. But I think with the way this roster is built, they want to play small as much as possible. They want to use their depth on the wing. They want to have more shooters on the court, and I think it's going to be very interesting how successful they can be doing that, right? Because I think as much as the league has trended smaller ever since the Warriors have kind of taken over the league and did what they did with that death lineup, I think you've seen consistently the MVPs of this league being Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, Giannis Antetokounmpo, big guys who dominate in the paint. And even the guys who aren't MVPs, Anthony Davis is one of the elite guys in the West. You can go down the list. A lot of these teams have really good, really dominant big guys in the paint, and how the Pelicans can compete with that, I think, is going to really tell a story of how far this season, how they can go this season. But I do think that we saw them lean into this a little bit at the end of last season, right? If you look back at that game they won at Phoenix late last year, where they started Jonas Valanciunas, played him 3 minutes, and they went out and basically dominated that game against Phoenix. So Zion had, I think it was the best game of his career on that night. And I think they kind of saw that, and they said, what if we do this a little bit more? What if we kind of lean into this? And I think more than anything, what they saw with those lineups is, man, when you just spread the floor for Zion and you take those guys out of the paint, it makes it so difficult for defenses, because you got to keep him away from the rim, but you also got to protect the three-point line with Trey Murphy, with Herb Jones, and it's hard to do both, right? It's hard to keep those bodies in front of Zion, but also prevent him from spraying out and hitting three-pointers. And I think that's where you hear Willie Green say, we've got to take 43s. We've got to get more threes up, because he understands that opens up the paint even more for Zion and Brandon Ingram. So I think they're going to want to play small as much as possible. They want to play fast. But I think a lot of that is going to be determined by, A, how much those guys are committed to doing the little things like rebounding, like, being communicating on their switches, kind of doing the stuff where you can make up for your lack of size, but also committing to actually getting those threes up, taking the right types of shots, not bailing defenses out. So I think it's going to be about how much those guys are committing to doing the right things night to night, and also if Zion can raise his level and really play at that MVP level where he can just make anybody look good, regardless of who you put out there with him.
You gave us rhyme or reason, which is something that I took out of Willie Green, I think, a little bit ago, a couple press conferences ago, him saying specifically what he had learned from last year. And I thought it was a very detailed answer. It was after the game on Monday, in which he said, look, we looked at how I do things. How does our offense do things? How can we use him better? And that's a, retrospective look of, okay, let's sit down and do those things. And I think that's where 5 Out came from, right? We were speaking with Wesley Johnson earlier this week about that, specifically, our new television analyst. What is that going to do? And you just said that. There's a reason they're doing that. There's a reason they're playing these lineups. I know media and fan people, not us, but it's because they can't get a trade for another center or something like that. There may be something to that. I don't know. But the point is, I think it's important what you just said. The genesis of why they're doing what they're doing is what you just said. It's what Wesley Johnson just said. They're trying to, yes, not only give Zion space, but it's also going to create the three-point shot, which is something this team wants to do. So it's almost like two birds with one stone sort of thing, isn't it?
Oh, no doubt. I think they definitely put a whole lot of thought into it. I think, for years they've been putting a lot of thought into how do you build a team around Zion, right? And I think you've seen several iterations of this. They had the Drew Holiday-Lonzo build, right? They had the Steven Adams build. They tried to do, they brought in CJ. Let's see how CJ fits into this thing. I think it's been constantly evolving. I think part of that also is the fact that he's missed so much time, right? So they haven't had opportunities to see how it looks, for long stretches with some of these lineups. But I think the conclusion they've come to over time is that we just got to clear the way for him and just open up those runways and allow him to make those easy passes to the perimeter and put not only the right shooters but the right just athletic guys around him where they can make up for what he lacks defensively or they can get out on the fast break, and it's not just Zion you're worried about. You got to stop Herb Jones in transition. You got to stop Trey Murphy in transition. So I think it's constantly evolving, what the best lineups look like around Zion, how you can make him most effective. But I think a big part of that is just him consistently bringing it night to night, him consistently doing what it takes to help those other guys out. So I think it might end up looking different next year. Who knows? But I think there's no doubt that they put a lot of thought into what it's supposed to look like around Zion. But ultimately, he's got to be out there performing night to night so they can find some of those answers.
I think sometimes we don't want to put too much stock into preseason results, but I think one of the things that was interesting to watch in the game against Orlando, which is a really good rebounding team, really good defensive team, pretty big, lineup was that the Pelicans held their own rebounding wise. It feels like that's something that we're going to have to keep a close eye on, is if they're going to keep trotting out small lineups. As long as they can be competitive, I think, on the boards, that'll be a problem. It won't be a problem. You don't want to get into where you're getting pounded there and you're going to have to start changing things up. But kind of switching to one of the other stories I think we've seen so far from training camp, Jordan Hawkins seemed like he had a really good training camp where he was making every shot, and then in the first preseason game against Orlando, he played really well. Definitely one of the positive highlights of that game. What are your thoughts on just the potential that he has this year to make an impact and maybe provide the Pelicans with somebody off the bench? It feels like almost like he's like a secret weapon. Like, people talk in the offseason a lot about the offseason moves that they made, obviously the players that they added, and some of the stars, but to me, he seems like maybe he's a little bit under the radar, especially from a national perspective.
No doubt, and you're exactly right. When you talk to people around the team, they love Jordan Hawkins. They are super high on his potential. They are very excited about the work he's done throughout the offseason. We've heard him say, we were talking about, what was it like to get things started in Nashville training camp, and he's like, I've been in training camp for the past 2 months. I've been working every day in New Orleans preparing, and he talked about, during your rookie season when you're preparing for the draft, you don't really get a real offseason, right? You're flying from state to state to work out for all of these teams. You don't get really any consistency with your workouts, with your meals, where you are. So I think this was a much different offseason for him with how he was able to work day to day, how he was able to focus on what he needed to do to improve day to day. And I think you've seen some of the fruits of that labor come to fruition with the way he's built up his body. I think he's physically stronger. You see him, being more comfortable, taking bumps. He talked about, just being more mature in the way he uses running off of screens, creating shots for himself. And I think that's going to be something very interesting, especially without Trey Murphy early in the season, how much they utilize him as that guy to come off the bench and really switch up the offense, where we're running a whole lot of pick and roll with our starting unit, and then we bring in Jordan Hawkins, and we're just running them off of screens. We're running them off of flares. You got to worry about him. It's not just him getting open, knocking down shots, but then you overreact to them, and that leads to other guys getting open shots. So I think that's something they really, really want to utilize. And, of course, he does a lot of the stuff they want to do, right? They want to shoot more threes. They want to play more in transition. These are all things that, feed into the strengths in his game. So I think he's a guy with a whole lot of potential. And if they can consistently get him playing, and they've got him out there with Trey and CJ, this team has the potential to be one of the best three-point shooting teams in the league. And I think that's where you've heard that consistent mention from the coaching staff is like, we have guys who can make threes at a high level. Yeah. They just got to shoot them, right? Yeah. They got to get them up. Because you can see, Trey Murphy, 40% guy. CJ McCollum was shot, 43% last year. Hawkins certainly has the potential to be a 40% guy. Herb Jones jumped up and became a 40% guy. So you've got the shooters. You just got to get the attempts up.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, that was interesting for Monday, guys, was him talking about he got to the free throw line 7 times. That's something that, we've seen in Vegas, we've seen in a lot of different things, even that game in Washington where he scored that much. This guy can shoot everything. It's not just threes, which is why I've always been a big fan of him. And I always tell poor Jim, I'm texting him during a game like, nobody can make a shot. This guy can come in and hit elbow jumpers. He can hit baseline jumpers. He can drive to the basket. He can shoot free throws. He can shoot threes. So, again, it goes back to what I was saying with Willie Greenback on Monday. I think they did a concerted effort to look at the talent they had. How can we best use everybody? And it just feels different, Will. It just feels, again, we'll see, right on the 23rd. But it just feels like this team has a better understanding of its roster, and now it's just a matter of going out there and doing it. As we close up, man, anything else stand out to you so far as we get ready for the final 2 preseason games, Sunday against Miami and then Tuesday against Houston?
No, I think, like you said, I think there are a lot of answers kind of were given to them with Trey Murphy being out. I think it's going to be maybe a little more difficult for Willie Green to figure out what these lineups look like night to night once they're fully healthy and they have all the pieces, because they have so much perimeter talent. And it's going to be difficult to play all of these guys night to night. It just is what it is. There's going to be certain nights where, like last year, where there's going to be like, man, why isn't Jose playing? Why isn't Hawk playing? There's going to be nights like that just because they have so much talent. But also, I think one guy I'm just going to keep an eye on all year is Yves Missi, just because the need for size, like we talked about on this team. And I think there are some people who got to see him in Nashville, and they're like, man, he might be a little further along than we thought. I think they drafted him understanding that it was going to be a little bit of a project. This was a guy who didn't start playing basketball until he was 15, 16 years old, only played 1 year of college basketball. But his skill set as a big guy who knows how to play in the dunker spot, who can catch lobs, who can block shots, he fits a lot of what teams want in centers today. But it's just about him getting the necessary experience and understanding of how to play on the NBA level. And I think he's a little bit further along than some people think. And I think it wouldn't surprise me if he kind of works his way into the rotation at some point. But I do think it's going to probably it's not going to be open, and I don't think they're going to play him 30 minutes or anything like that. But I do think that's going to be a guy where everybody's saying they need centers, they need more size. I think Yves Missi can be a guy who could potentially answer some of those questions down the road once he gets more experience under his belt.
Yeah, good point. Final thoughts, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's unique. He has such a unique background because he's only played basketball for a few years. There aren't that many guys in the NBA that have that description to how they enter the league, but I feel like he alternates between watching some of the things he does and you say he's kind of raw, and other times where you say, where did that footwork and reverse layup in the game against Orlando come from? Yeah. Like, that's not a guy who's – I mean, you see guys that have played for 10, 15 years that can't do that. 100%. So, I mean, he gives you glimpses of things that I can see why there's excitement about his promise down the road because, I mean, some of the stuff that he's already picked up in the short amount of time that he's playing makes me think – I mean, if – you see the four fouls in the second quarter, but then you see some of the other good stuff that he did as well. So it's going to be. I think it's going to be really interesting watching him and fun watching him the way that he develops throughout the season.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you're a big guy in the paint and Yves Missi around, I would say watch your head because he's going to be dropping some elbows on some folks. He don't mind picking up 3 fouls in 3 minutes. So that's going to be one thing to keep an eye on too.
Well, I tell you what, you were saying watch your head that way. I'll close up by saying watch your head the other way.
Oh yeah.
You were you heard me ask the question to Willie Green. Wednesday's first practice on the Tuesday night practice we saw, he had a putback dunk on Dejounte Murray, who had position in front of the rim, was grabbing the rebound, right? He was on his way to get it. And Yves Missi jumped over him to grab the ball. And I'm not kidding. I asked Willie Green, was his head above the backboard? I just want people to understand what that means. Yeah. Was his head above the backboard?
You mean the square?
Yes.
Not above the entire backboard. That would be a feat.
Right. I mean, that's what but I mean, it was unbelievable. I mean, he jumped completely over.
It was over the rim, I think,
and grabbed it. Yeah. And just, I mean, and Dejounte's not short. I mean, that's one of the things that I've seen in seeing him this close. He's not a small point guard, man. He's got some size on him, but it was crazy just to see that. That's uncoachable. I mean, not uncoachable. Sorry, you either have that or you don't. Right. Right. You can't coach athleticism and talent. Right.
You got it or you don't, for sure.
Exactly. Well, thank you for your time, man. Appreciate it.
I appreciate you guys, man. I'm looking forward to next time I get to be in the studio, man.
You like this?
We're gonna have to keep this space.
I kind of like this, to be honest.
Yeah, this is great.
Being in here in a little bit. Yeah. I mean, look, and I got no qualms about this because they struggled shooting here. So practice as much as you want here at the Smoothie King Center. Mr. Will Guillory of The Athletic, thank you for your time.
Yes, sir.
All right, our thanks to Will Guillory from The Athletic for joining us. And look, very insightful stuff. I didn't even know he went and hooked and hung out with the team and Zion Williamson in Texas and get those works. I think if you're a Pels fan, you like hearing specifics on certain things that he, I guess, thought and worked at. I loved hearing that.
Yeah, I read some of what Will had written earlier in the summer. I forget exactly when that was. It was maybe a month or so ago that he kind of reported on his findings from his trip to I think it was the Dallas area. North of Dallas is where Zion was working out. So it was cool to hear some insight. Will's always good on the podcast. Love having him on as much as we possibly can. But I'm looking forward to – part of the reason, honestly, we had him on too is because he covers the Heat, and that's the game on Sunday. So looking forward to it. I think Miami will be an interesting test. I mean, we know that they're a consistently good defensive team. They're kind of middle-of-the-pack rebounding team last season, so it'll be interesting to see as well. You know, we talked about the rebounding against Orlando was pretty good. The Pelicans didn't win the battle, but they hung closely in that. I think they only lost that 44-40. So that'll be something, again, we watch against Miami on Sunday.
We're supposed to say an undisclosed location, Jim, not exactly where it was. You know, come on, Jim. No, I'm kidding. I don't even know where that is. Dallas is slightly large, so it could be anywhere north of Dallas there as well. You kind of touched on it, rebounding battle. Look, I think we talked about it back on Wednesday that if you're Willie Green, you loved what you saw on Monday. You could check a lot of different boxes, whether it's rebounding, defensive steals. Some of your offensive players put up some nice numbers. So Sunday, as I sit down and watch the game that tips off at 2:30, what am I paying attention to? What are you paying attention to?
I think, again, tracking the starting lineup. I mean, they were really good against Orlando. They won a lot of those minutes. I think that'll be interesting to watch. It seems like from what little I've seen so far of maybe Miami Heat preseason highlights, Jimmy Butler's been playing, Bam Adebayo's been playing. Their main guys have all been on the court, which I think is a little different than what happened a lot of last season. So this could be a really interesting test, and it'll be fun to watch some basketball. I know the Saints are playing at noon, so we're going to have a little bit of a test to get down to the arena, but it should be fun.
I think one of the things that I took out of what head coach Willie Green said, what he wants to see from his team is toughness, especially in trying to get rebounding when they play small ball. This is a team in Miami. They're known for having practices and games within the game of practice to teach toughness. So again, I think one of the right teams you want to see and test yourself here in the early preseason.
Yeah, and I think they're definitely known for how tough they've been over the years. But another element, a little wrinkle to this that I think is worth watching too is they also don't play a big lineup. Bam Adebayo is like a 6'8", 6'9" center. So I think in a lot of ways this should be an interesting matchup. We don't know what the Pelicans are going to do starting lineup-wise, but if it's what it was in the game against Orlando on Monday, we'll see Daniel Tice at center, and we'll see some of the other guys that we expect to be in the lineup. So should be fun. Looking forward to 2:30 on Sunday.
All right, sounds good. As always, now I'm going to go shoot some baskets here. You think they're going to run me out of here or what?
Yeah, you might want to wait a little while until this place clears, but I have confidence. I'm looking forward to watching your jumper, Gus, to see. Everyone's been working on things in the offseason. How much have you gotten locked in on your jumper?
Well, I'll say this. The word around the media is that Will Guillory is the best three-point shooter. How about a little three-point shooting contest?
I would love to see that. We need to get that on video.
We'll make it work. We'll make it work. As always, we'll be back with you next week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as we get closer and closer to the start of the regular season. Enjoy the weekend. And thanks, as always, for tuning us in here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.
Thanks for listening to the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast. Join us 3 times per week on Pelicans.com, the Pelicans mobile app, the iHeartRadio app, or where you get your podcasts. And be sure to give Jim and Gus a follow on X at Jim_Eichenhofer and GCat_17. We'll see you next time, right here on the New Orleans Pelicans Podcast.